A little over 6 years ago, the great pianist Van Cliburn died. His greatness lay not so much in his exceptional musical talent as in the fact that his piano playing built a bridge of understanding between the United States and the Soviet Union during the depths of the Cold War. The Russian people put aside prejudice and took to their heart this American who thrillingly played the first piano concerto of the Russian composer Tchaikovsky. In music, the Russians found a bond with someone who should have been an enemy. The cultural exchanges that followed helped thaw the relationship of the two superpowers. There is no question that we live in a very polarized world and a very polarized country. Our government is paralyzed because opposite sides of issues simply will not compromise. While old Cold War enemies have learned to get along, new political and religious enemies threaten us. Bridging divisions within the church itself is one of the biggest challenges facing Pope Francis. The parable of the Good Samaritan teaches us that it is possible to find common ground, even with enemies. Jews and Samaritans hated each other because each thought God was on their side. They would not have called each other neighbor. The two religious Jews in this parable did not even treat their fellow Jew as a neighbor. They walked right past him. All the more reason Jesus' listeners would have expected the Samaritan to also walk by. It is the Samaritan in this parable that treats his fallen enemy with compassion. He was able to ignore religious differences and hear the music of their common humanity. Jesus' interrogator was able to see that the Samaritan was the true neighbor. Jesus said to him and says to us, "Go, go, and do likewise." Jesus is telling us that compassion can work miracles. It can make neighbors out of enemies. It can bring together those who thought that any kind of neighborliness was impossible. It can even enable us to love our enemies as Jesus did. If a Samaritan can offer kindly service to a Jew, then a Palestinian can respect an Israeli. A traditionalist can find common ground with a progressive. A Christian with a Muslim. A Republican with a Democrat. The secret is compassion. Jesus challenges us today to think of the person in our lives from whom we are most alienated. Think of that person as a fellow human being, as a fellow soul, a fellow traveler, redeemed by Christ, as someone and not simply as some problem to be solved. Hear the music and see what becomes possible. Too often, we let the little things become unsolved big things. So let's ponder today 3 young kids whose lives were forever changed in May of 2013. At the time, Steve Hartman shared the following on CBS's Sunday morning show. He said, "Caleb and Colby are 11-year-old twins, but they could not be more different. They disagree on almost everything and are constantly bickering about something. They have an 8-year-old sister named Courtney, and they don't get along any better with her. But that all changed on Monday, May 20th, when a monster tornado ripped through their hometown of Moore, Oklahoma. Caleb, Colby, and Courtney were students at Plaza Towers, the elementary school that was totally destroyed. When the tornado struck, Courtney was hunkered down in a hallway, the boys in a bathroom. As the storm roared, the 3 were terrified that something might happen to one of the others. After, they found each other in the rubble that was once their school. The kids say they hugged for a long time, and they haven't let go since. We thought that each other was severely injured or worse, killed," said Colby. "They're my only brothers, and if they died, I don't know what I'd do," said Courtney, who required hospitalization after banging her head. "We may not have a house, but we still have a family," said Caleb. Despite the loss of their home, their mom realizes that their family has been blessed. She said, "It took this experience for them to realize how much their sister and brothers mean to them." My friends, amazing how sometimes life's greatest gifts are the ones we already have. It would be good for all of us to remember this when our first impulse all too often is to criticize, rather than to attempt to understand when decisions we don't like happen. Often, it is in the course of the traumas and tragedies of life, which we have seen all too often this year, that we rediscover how important we are to one another. We appreciate again those most important to us, whom we've been taking for granted. But, as Jesus makes clear in his story of the Good Samaritan, we are always each other's neighbor. We are always brother and sister to each other. The parable of the Good Samaritan calls us to embrace a vision of faith that sees every man, every woman, and every child, regardless of what labels society or we ourselves have assigned to them, as our neighbors. Christ calls his disciples to look beyond what divides us and focus on what unites us, to put aside our own needs and our own wants to embrace the needs of others, to see our own wealth and talents as a means to bringing healing and hope into the lives of those who have so little. The Good Samaritan is the personification of gospel charity, the embodiment of the gospel vision of humanity as a community of everyone, male and female, rich and poor, able and challenged, sharing the same sacred dignity as sons and daughters of the God of all that is good. We are about to be united as one bread, one body in this Eucharist. The grace of Christ's presence among us will not dissolve all our differences, but it can help us to reach out to one another with compassion, to recognize what does unite us so as to love and serve one another, to go and do likewise, as Jesus commands us to do today, as Jesus commands us to do every day. Amen.